We parents really need their help for our kids. So we hope people will go into care for adults, which will be a difficult battle because it's not a system that's open to that kind of thing. You know, it's traditionally been very hierarchical and authoritarian, and those are all the battles to be fought. Well, you're planning to prepare material for the rapidly expanding field of BCBAs.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that there are going to be so many people coming into this field because it's so much needed. And as a parent of a child with autism, I see that need across the spectrum. Of course, there's so much focus on the early intervention, and I still think that not all children with autism are getting quality early intervention even now. But all of these children are going to become adults, and they will require care for behavioral management and learning and training issues throughout their lives.
Yeah.
And more information is coming about the number of very severely afflicted adults. A lot of these young people have self-injury, they're nonverbal, they don't have a lot of skills. How are they going to be cared for the next 40 to 60 years? They can't simply be dumped into our current system where they don't have access to the professional services that are related to their disability. If that same person also had a cardiac condition, that person would have cardiac doctors and cardiologists available from birth through the lifespan. So we can't say that, oh, well, you know, your autism services end when you're 12 or you're 21 and then just, you know, it's catch as catch can for the rest of your life, even though you still continue to have autism and you still continue to be nonverbal and you are still responding to the events in your environment, and the people around you don't know how to structure your environment for your success. So that's the big problem. So I would like to ask that new burgeoning crop of BCBAs to think about the adult spectrum and the tremendous need that's going to be in that area. And of course, that's again going to be a big struggle to get that all approved and funded.
Are you comfortable sharing a few words around like your personal experience with autism?
Yeah, sure. I'm comfortable doing that.
Okay. Really, wherever you'd like to start.
Well, I have a 23-year-old son with severe autism who's nonverbal, and we are, of course, dealing with adult services. And the thing that struck me almost immediately was that while with the younger population, there's a vague knowledge of behavioral practices and principles, in the adult community, in the groups serving the adult community, it's very rare. And that's because the adult community is still mostly focused on the population they served they still serve these people, but physically disabled people and people with different kinds of developmental disabilities. So they're more focused on issues like wheelchairs and ramps and medical care and lifts and going to the doctor for all your medications and your physical treatments for the severe physical disabilities, which are very significant and important. So the big issue, of course, with adults with autism is many of them are in decent physical health. They don't need to go to the medical doctor a couple of times a month, but they do need good behavioral management, and they do need people who know how to structure their environments so that the adults can learn skills, can participate in community activities, and have a good quality of life.
Yeah.
And that is not present at all in adult services. There's no concept of that. And so what happens is that young people with autism are turned over to the care of aides who are well-meaning and hardworking and all of that, but autism is a complex disability, and I think you need somebody who has more than a high school education to at least supervise. And we don't even have BCBAs in the higher level supervisory positions in these agencies.
I worked
To set the tone.
I worked in that role too. I worked with the adult population, largely under intellectual disabilities and a whole gambit of other disabilities listed there. And then again, most recently, like my past position was working in an adult intellectual disability provider through a nonprofit, and that I guess as a behavior analyst, like really opens my eyes as to how important the early work is that we're doing and that lack of services was very apparent after whatever that cutoff is.
Yeah.
It seems like sometimes you're lucky if that cutoff goes past 18, like really lucky if it goes past
18, right, exactly.
older after that. And then if you do have services, there's a very stark difference between the amount and quality of hours that someone may receive.
Right.
Drops drastically.
Right.
Very quickly.
And I think that could be remedied if the people with the training and the skills could then train all the aides. But of course, then you run into this whole problem in the adult services field where the aides are so poorly paid.
Yeah.
And you have constant turnover. So it's very challenging to train that population and have them work at that low level of wage.
So has it been hard for you to figure out a potential placement for your son?
Oh, absolutely, because we have no idea. I mean,
what are the ramifications of that? Is it like to the point that you're looking around, you're moving, like how I mean,
well, we don't know. We're just taking it day by day, but and much of this depends on which state you live in.
Yeah.
But I think parents around the country are really struggling with these long-term care issues. Mm-hmm. And many of us have children who require 24-hour care. Mm-hmm. Certainly my son has to be in a supervised setting. He doesn't necessarily need to have somebody trotting after him for 24 hours, but he needs to be in some sort of well-organized setting where there are people who are not going to scold him or berate him because he's displaying behaviors that are a result of a poorly managed environment. Yeah. You know, that's the whole thing. And to ensure that he has a decent quality of life and all of those things. And I don't know a single parent who has any idea of how that's going to happen. So we are all just in the same boat, and we don't know where we're going. We don't know how it's going to happen. And there's no guidance. There's no template.
Yeah, can't imagine. It's such a different role of like working in that context for 40 hours a week or whatever it is than it is to living it. Like, can't even imagine. Yeah. So, I knew some very certain places where I've worked, like sometimes parents kind of got together and worked together. Is it just, do you see like this kind of boots on the ground grass movement?
Oh, that's very much happening, but I don't know if you're aware of the CMS rule that came out and was modified last year that spoke, the original ruling was to prevent any kind of intentional communities from being established.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah,
No,
they didn't, because people wanted to get together and like buy like 2 or 3 houses and, you know, as a group, or maybe buy a small, more rural property with some acreage and put up some kind of a multi-unit dwelling, and you know, people wanted to do.
Yeah, and so was that a parents' initiative?
Yeah, very much. Because parents didn't see where all of this housing was going to come from, so they thought, well, you know, our kids have special needs, and you can't just plop them down in any little spot that becomes available. They need comprehensive round-the-clock care. So you need a physical setting that accommodates people coming in to provide round-the-clock care. And so these were the attempts that were made, but then at the federal level they said, oh, no intentional communities.
Yeah.
Because they're isolating.
Yeah.
And we're already so isolated. It's like, okay, why can't we be isolated in comfort as opposed to...
Yeah, that was what I was thinking, is the whole deinstitutionalization movement is probably what they were trying to lean on that one. But I guess this gets into a little bit of a bigger discussion on like the different types of services that are out there that are available. This deinstitutionalization was a good example of where there was, I think, a right intent there originally on how, like what was meant by that movement. But when you completely try to rid a social system or some sort of system like this of a particular type of setting or treatment, you are limiting certain people in that group. Like there is no one size fits all. There never has been. And so the quality of care that you're describing for some of the people in that community, like it sounds like that is required, right? Like that's what you're suggesting is 100%.
Absolutely.
I would say as like a practitioner, it's useful to have a system in which if you can't serve somebody in one certain setting and population and there's another one that's better, it is really nice to have that resource, right? Of okay, let's refer over to this type of program and service.
Right.
And that was one thing that we would champion so hard the last 3 years I worked in adult services in Nevada, was we talked about is like degrees of freedom, the number of choices that you have. And if your movement at a federal, state, local, whatever level is starting to limit the number of choices that you can make, limiting those degrees of freedom that you have, it seems like it's not really in the best interest of the community, right?
No, it isn't.
If you're limiting options that could help an adult with some sort of very well-designed ethical, support or treatment.
Yeah, and I think that degrees of freedom statement is very good, because of course that was the intent, to give each person complete freedom and control of his own or her own life and future, which I think is great. But the intent appeared to many of us that, okay, every adult has to go and live somewhere in the community in his or her own little apartment, and then 24-hour staff comes into the apartment. And to me, that is the most isolating concept, because nobody goes and makes friends or spends time with adults with severe autism. I mean, it just doesn't happen. The community does not step up to that. So then you have all these adults isolated, scattered around. Who's watching them? What's happening to them? There's no way to know. And okay, well, sure, you could say, well, they're living in the community, they're in their own apartments. That doesn't mean anything. My son can't access anything without somebody escorting him. So wouldn't it be nicer for him to be in a more communal setting? And why can't we do that? And have the economies of scale of my son sitting over here with his 24-hour staff. Maybe on the next floor, there's somebody else with 24-hour staff. Couldn't we consolidate those resources and use them more efficiently and have more services?
Where do you see things heading? Is it just kind of like take it day by day?
I take it day by day. I take it day by day. There's tremendous angst, of course, in the parent community. There's also, we feel we have to combat this massive ignorance about what autism is. I don't know if you're aware of the National Council on Severe Autism.
No.
Oh, it's a group that has recently formed. And its goal is to combat the kind of fluffy image of autism that we see so much in the media. Because in the general media, you will see stories like, oh, this young man with autism was crowned king of the prom, or this person with autism sang the national anthem at or this person ran in a marathon. I mean, those are all wonderful things, but nowhere in these stories does it ever explain what the service level of these people is, and it creates a false impression for the general public and the policymakers that all people with autism can run in marathons and go to the prom, and they're elected prom king or queen, and they can sing anthems, or they can recite poetry, or they go on stage and a celebrity there are some celebrity greets them, and it makes it sound like autism is a picnic, and it's not. And then when you look at the statistics underneath that, half are very severe, nonverbal, difficult, behavior, self-injury. That's a very different story, but that does not appear in the media, and that's the goal of the National Council on Severe Autism. And they're putting forward heartbreaking articles, which are the truth. These are the nightmares of these families struggling with these severely afflicted children, which of course is a word I'm not supposed to say. They're not supposed to be severely afflicted. But when you have a teenage son who bangs his head on the floor so hard that he breaks his teeth, I think that's a severe affliction. I mean, that is not fun. That is not a picnic. That is a very severe problem. And when you read these articles, you can see these families too had minimal access to BCBA services, just minimal. And the less you have, the greater the escalation of the problems. It's so sad.
It compounds very quickly in those situations. So this is kind of a good segue into what you were telling me before we started, which was what we need to see more out there. Right. Can you talk around that a little bit?
Oh yeah, well thank you for that question. That's a great question because it follows on what I was just saying about the National Council for Autism is putting out stories about the harsh reality. And I would love to see more stories from the ABA community about great successes with implementing a program. And I realize there are privacy issues with that, but how about a success story about a successful implementation with Child X that solved this problem, and therefore Child X and Child X's family can now do these additional community activities or whatever they like to do because Child X now has the skills, or Adult X, or whatever. I think success stories that show that would be very powerful. I also think there needs the general public is still massively unaware of the benefits of positive reinforcement and exactly how that works in increasing productive behaviors, and even more unaware, if possible, of the detriments of punishment. And many people still see punishment as the right way. You've got to discipline that kid, or you've got to teach that kid a lesson. And people don't have an alternative method, so that's what they fall back on, that whole thinking, all those cliches and everything. And I think examples of the detrimental effects of punishment from a scientific perspective would be very good. People don't know that punishment creates aggression in the future. They don't know that it can create learned helplessness.
Yeah, it just
narrows the behavior. It narrows the
pressure.
Yes, and I've seen that exactly. And people who aren't aware of that will look at that behavior and say, well, that kid is just falling apart. He's just not doing anything. Come on, kid, whap, whap, whap. I mean, they don't actually hit, but I mean, that's kind of attitude. I have seen that. And yet I can't speak about it because it's not my position to make those statements in that setting. So
just absurd itself, being a parent in the situation.
And I think too, people don't understand at all that if you create a punishing environment or you have a punishing individual, that the child flees, that's often the reason for this escape behavior or avoidance. People don't understand that at all. They don't understand that. So I think better information and portrayed in a storytelling format about both the benefits of positive reinforcement and the really dreadful implications of punishment.
Yeah, that's there's a few things come up. One of them, most notably, I guess, is I think there's been this kind of like discomfort in behavior analysts being like feeling that they can portray that sort of stuff in a way that doesn't seem to be self-promoting or in a way kind of advertising of things, and it gets into an ethical discussion usually with how our ethical guidelines are set up. I think there's 100% definitely room to be able to work on something with that intent while behaving ethically about it. Like that should not, I don't know why that would be an issue per se. If it's for the sake of increasing ethical practices and influencing a culture, to do things that are in the best interests of a population or a disorder or disability or anything, right? Like that, we should definitely be working towards those sort of things, right?
Well, if you pick up any Reader's Digest, there is often a story about a tragic accident and then the heroic surgeon. So, a medical team did an amazing job helping this victim. And nobody blinks twice about that.
Part of what I was actually sharing yesterday at the workshop that I was doing was just trying to talk with analysts about, it seems like we're a little more rigid and worried about this as a scientific community in general, not just behavior analysis, but scientific community, when it comes to how we're crafting and approaching different aspects of how we share what's going on. So for example, in our scientific literature and things like that, most people are like, this is a very clear, clean, objective, painting of what happened, and it's of this research study. But one thing that was made very apparent to me in some resources I was looking at was that the structure of our paper format in and of itself is 100% crafted. This introduction, methods, results, and discretion, like that is not just an objective statement. It is something that is 100% crafted, tweaked, organized. There's a review process. People have their hands on it. And it's like, I think there's this discomfort in, if I'm sharing things, with a client's progress and whatnot, like, and I'm editing and moving things around, like that makes me uncomfortable. And it's like, well, we do this everywhere else. It's just, we probably need some guidelines on how it happens, right?
Yeah.
What goes out there. So for example, when we were doing some advocacy work as a nonprofit in Reno that I was working at, we made it really clear that if we were advocating for a type of outcome for the community, like access to more services, as just, here's what's in the area, right? This is what's accessible.
Right.
So I think there's ways like that where we have plenty of room within our guidelines to be able to start behaving in a way that helps better the situation. The other part of it is just, there's, and this is a problem for anybody, more so parents than anybody in the system, but the time to be able, and the organization, the coordination to be able to do those sort of things. So I look at it as a duty for us to figure out how to set up a system in which we could start doing more of those sort of endeavors where we're sharing information and whatnot and getting it out there. I don't think it shouldn't be a barrier, and I think it's sometimes perceived as a barrier in our community.
Well, and I can sympathize with those concerns, and I think it's good that the community is struggling with those issues and making conscious efforts to look at all the ramifications. That's very important.
Yeah, and then the part that I also think of quite a bit is you have, like you were saying, there's misrepresentations, and those are just continuing to go. Like we can not do anything and let that continue, or we could try to put out our own image of like what we think is an accurate representation of what's going on in this field. So,
yeah, I think that's great.
What else? Was there anything else that you're...
Well, those are the things at the top of my mind, of course, because I'm living the adult lifespan issue with my son, as is all the families I know. So
are there other resources we can point parents to that may be of interest, like the...
Well, that's a little bit difficult, of course, because everything is different state by state. But I think it's very important for parents to become familiar with their state's rules. And that's a complex issue, because you have to go to their websites, and you actually have to go to their Department of Developmental Disabilities, or whatever they call it, and look it up, because there's tremendous misinformation about this system, about the rules. Whatever your state is, everybody is probably misinformed, because these rules change constantly and people can't stay on top of them. So really, if you as the parent are talking to this person or that person, and the person says, well, our regulations say this or that, you really don't know if that's true, because the regulations may have changed 3 months ago. So I would recommend for parents that they take upon themselves the burden of reading their state's regulations, which is a heavy burden. Parents shouldn't have to do it, but anybody else you talk to will be misinformed. And if you as yourself know how to go to the regulations and read them, and you know how to keep track of them, then you can be the informed one. And I started doing that, and I was amazed when I then went out and talked to people, and I'd hear people say, the state says this or the state says that, and I thought, that's not what's in the regulations that I read last week. So, and all these people are misinformed, and they're misinformed at different levels. So it's again an information quest.
I feel like one of the large missing components is being able to create an easy way for people to understand what to expect from a perspective like yourself as a parent, caregiver, stakeholder in some sort of way with that person that's affected. So that seems like a burden, but it is like the most important thing is information, understanding what to be able to expect, things like that, right? Okay, how about any closing thoughts for like the young analysts coming up in the field and getting interested in helping people out?
I think just all the things we've been talking about. There's so many misconceptions that continue to have to be battled, and just the incredible need for these services. I mean, their services will be so welcome and so much sought after. So all I can say is a big thank you for pursuing that course of study, and we parents really need their help for our kids, especially after we're gone. That's the big part. So we hope people will go into care for adults, which will be a difficult battle because it's not a system that's open to that kind of thing. You know, it's traditionally been very hierarchical and authoritarian, and those are all the battles to be fought in that arena. You know, we have to fight them as parents. But please get involved. Help our young adults and our older adults.
All right, before you go, please like, share, comment, subscribe, whatever it is. It helps this video reach more people. I want to be able to share Martha's story as far and wide as we can go. These important issues need to be heard by more people, and that is how you can help. If you're really into, you can join patreon.com/thedailyba. It is a community of people to help support this. We're over 200 strong now, and it helps financially make these sort of things happen. And in return, I share a lot of behind the scenes, what's going on, and you can help influence the channel. Big shout out to Martha. Thank you for jumping on. This was captured at the Hoosier Association Behavior Analysis, and I will see you in the next one. That is your Daily BA.